Welcome to the Standard Deviations podcast, presented by Orion Advisor Solutions and hosted by Dr. Daniel Crosby, Orion's Chief Behavioral Officer and New York Times bestselling author. Each week, Dr. Crosby interviews a fascinating new guest on a range of compelling topics, from literature to psychology to financial wellness. To learn more about Dr. Crosby's behavioral finance work at Orion, visit www.orion.com.
Hello and welcome to the Standard Deviations podcast. I am your host, Dr. Daniel Crosby, and today I am joined by Jon Dauphiné, who leads the Foundation for Financial Planning's efforts to develop and grow pro bono financial planning programs for people in need. Under his leadership, FFP has created signature national programs to serve people with cancer, at-risk seniors, and other vulnerable groups, and developed pro bono planner match.org to link CFP professionals to volunteer opportunities. Jon previously served 15 years at AARP, first as its Senior Vice President of Economic Strategy, followed by 8 years as SVP of Programs. Jon is an attorney who has held major roles in DC law firms and public affairs firms. He graduated cum laude from Harvard Law School and with highest honors from Vassar College. Welcome to the show.
Great to be here. Thanks, Daniel.
So we were put together by our mutual friend, Eric Clark, who I miss every day. Eric, hope you're having fun in retirement, but it's wonderful to have you here. So, Jon, you have a super impressive resume. I mean, Harvard Law School, I've heard of it. And there's no shortage of opportunities for Harvard-educated lawyers with a real wealth of work experience like you have. With all that you could be doing, what led you to the place that you are in doing what you're doing? Why is it so vital in your estimation?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because this job for me, and this is my 8th year, was kind of the perfect coming together of interests and passions. And when I was in law school, I did pro bono work at a legal clinic that helped tenants. And the tenants were being evicted, but often they lived in circumstances that were absolutely terrible. You know, in the middle of the Boston winter, no heat, live wires that threatened their children, roaches everywhere, rats. I mean, it was really, really appalling. And legally, they didn't have a duty to pay rent, until their dwellings were brought up to code. But without adequate legal representation, they really didn't have a hope. So giving them pro bono legal representation made me see the power of this work. But the fact that a lot of people just don't have access, right, to the U.S. justice system. And then when I looked for a law firm to go work at, I wanted a firm that had a culture of giving back. And I wanted a firm that enabled pro bono on the part of the young associates. And I did find a firm that indeed did that. So that's kind of how I got bitten, early on by the pro bono bug, if you will. And I saw the impact and the power it had when professionals are willing to lend their skills for free to underserved folks that really, really need it. But the other factor was from AARP. And when I was there over time, I ran a lot of different programs to help struggling seniors achieve better financial stability and security. So everything from financial literacy to preserving the important social insurance benefits they rely on, like Social Security and Medicare, and then just all of the work to make sure that people can retire one day and can have a successful retirement financially. And then that really came together when this job became available. It's this great mission to bring financial advice that really, really helps struggling lower income people achieve better stability and a more hopeful future. But also equally as important to me was just fostering a pro bono tradition, in this much younger field. But a really vibrant field that consists mainly of helpers. Financial planners are helpers, and there's such a passion to help not just high net worth folks, but also people that are more marginalized financially. So it really, for me, was the coming together of all of these interests.
Yeah, it seems like the perfect blend for each of your worlds. And, in the same way that people don't always have access to the American legal system, we know that only a minority of Americans have access to sort of a formal financial plan a formal financial advisor. And that's the wrong that you and your organization are trying to right. Now, you and your organization recently completed the most comprehensive study ever on pro bono financial advice, a pretty vast undertaking. You talked to almost 1,200 CFP professionals. We're going to go into some of the specifics of the study here. You have sort of a 3-part case for pro bono financial advice that I thought was wonderful. But at the highest level, was there anything that really jumped out at you or surprised you as you got the results of this study back?
Yeah, so what was really fascinating was the data that came in about where people want to work, and what really matters. And so what we found was about half of the CFP professionals we surveyed said they would rather work at a firm that had an encouraging policy on pro bono service. But only about 28% of them said that they thought their firm did indeed have an encouraging policy. So what we saw there is really a gap, a pretty significant gap between what advisors are looking for in a workplace, in a culture, and what they're getting. So we think there's a real, kind of a human capital advantage for firms that are willing to be more on the cutting edge and willing to do more, be more visible, and do more to really support advisors who want to do pro bono service for underserved communities.
Yeah. Just like when you were a young lawyer looking for a place to go, you wanted a place that would allow you to serve. I used to work in the organizational behavior sort of leadership development space. And one thing that we consistently found is that employers underestimate or sort of underrate non-financial incentives that would set them apart as an employer of choice, right? We usually kind of focus on the blocking and tackling of, benefits and money. And I think there's a lot of sort of, we'll call them well-being perks or human perks that are often overlooked. And I know we're going to get to that. Like I said in the intro there, you make a 3-part case for pro bono financial advice, and it's a moral case, a business case, and a professional development case. And I'd like to talk about each of these in turn. I think some are more obvious than others. I think perhaps the most obvious is the moral case, but help us understand, what did the research unearth about the moral case for doing pro bono financial planning?
Yes. Well, not surprisingly, virtually every CFP that responded said that they predominantly are driven to do this work by the satisfaction they get from helping other people. And so that, no surprise. So, we knew that would register very highly. But one of the things I'll point out here, just from talking to so many different CFP professionals who have volunteered to do this work, is there's a special kind of satisfaction that these volunteers can get when they're helping somebody who normally would not have access to their professional talents. They feel tremendous satisfaction helping their high net worth clients in their paid practices. But when they're helping a family that is truly on the edge with no margin for error in their financial decisions, the sense of purpose and meaning can be even more powerful. And I can't tell you how many times I hear things from the volunteers like, and I'm directly quoting, pro bono feeds my soul, or pro bono reminds me why I got into this business in the first place. And we love hearing that, because it really is about this special dimension of satisfaction you get when you're helping somebody who normally couldn't walk in that door, right, with $1 million in investable assets. You're really helping somebody who doesn't have anywhere to turn. Maybe they'll go to, there's a payday lender down the block. Maybe there's an institution that will help them, but we'll just basically try to sell them something. It's very, very difficult for people in underserved groups to get true, objective fiduciary advice and planning. So it really, really is something compelling for many of the volunteers. But the other thing I found really interesting in the research that we did was that almost 80% of the respondents said that they also feel great satisfaction and motivation in giving back to the profession. And so often I hear from volunteers as well, this has been a wonderful career. This really has served me and my family so well. I've been able to make a great living. I've been able to have pretty good work-life balance. I want to give back. I want to give some of my time, some of my treasure back to this movement, that really helps people who normally couldn't access great objective advice. So I found that really interesting, both this moral dimension of helping, people who need the help, but also a moral dimension of really serving this kind of emerging profession. I mean, financial planning's only been around for about 50 years. It's a comparatively young profession when you look at dentistry, medicine, law, other professions that have a serious tradition of pro bono. But I see so many practitioners really wanting to join together and foster this movement. So again, I find that very inspiring as well.
That is, and two things. First of all, you've brought up a couple of times now how young this profession is, and I think we forget that sometimes. I mean, I think psychology is young; it's a couple hundred years old. Yeah. Financial planning's much younger still, and so I think the work that you're doing is so important. And the second thing is that giving back to the profession and this idea that advisors are helpers. The reason that I, as a psychologist, was drawn to this work initially is because I saw my dad, who's a financial advisor. I saw the way that he treated it like a calling. Like it just wasn't a simple job for him. It was a calling, and he felt called to help and to sort of guide and shepherd the families who had entrusted him with their wealth. And this is a big-hearted helping industry, and I think that gets lost sometimes in the numbers. And I love what you are doing to help bring that back and to help people give back to the industry. So the moral case, I do think you brought out some sort of interesting, non-obvious points there, but I think we can all see how there is a moral imperative to give back. The business case to me seems less obvious. So help me understand for, a business that has limited resources and maybe says, well, we'd like to give back, but we don't know if we can afford it. Let's talk about the numbers. Let's talk about the business case for doing this kind of pro bono work.
Yeah, this was a little bit, we did not even expect to see results like this come out of the work. About half of CFP professionals said they would rather work at a firm that has an encouraging, visible policy on pro bono service and supporting advisors who are doing this work. So, right away, that was a really, really interesting data point. That's a huge vote for employers to do more. Because again, only 28% said that they see their employer as encouraging this type of service. Now, if you look at advisors under the age of 35 and also female advisors, those two groups, we saw 55% of each saying they would rather work at a firm with an encouraging policy on pro bono. So in those groups, even more salient passion for this work and for the kind of culture that really, really advances and nourishes a pro bono, an ability for the firm to support pro bono. So we were particularly pleased. The other thing I would point out is 70% of the respondents said they think financial advisory firms should be more like the law firms in how they advance and support pro bono. Again, that was very striking to us because I think a lot of times people think of the big law firms as really leading in how they've entrenched pro bono, how they support their associates and their partners that are doing the work. And again, we saw a real appetite here for that type of model to be embraced in financial advice.
So, we talk all the time about this war for talent, and I think especially young talent and diverse talent. And those numbers are really striking, right? I mean, we're 70%, I think, among the cohort that you could argue is the most sought after cohort. When you consider that the average financial professional is a white man in his late 50s, sort of by the books. We need new blood. We need new, young, diverse voices in this industry, and those new, young, diverse voices want to be giving back. So that being the case, Jon, what do you think accounts for the delta between how many advisors want to do this work and how few firms are offering it?
Well, I think, as we've discussed, it's a relatively new field. So, there really hasn't been the time that's gone by. If you look at some of the other very, very long established professional fields. So I think that is, I think that's a factor. But I also think, the words financial planning, they tend to evoke people that have a lot of resources, right? So we generally think, oh, financial planning, that's for the rich. And if you go and you speak to clients or potential clients, lower income families that could really, really use really great objective fiduciary financial advice and planning, and you say, hey, do you want to meet for free with a financial planner? A lot of times they'll say, well, I don't have enough. That's not for me. And so one of the challenges we at the Foundation for Financial Planning face is actually convincing these nonprofits that serve underserved populations that indeed they can benefit enormously from this service. And so, we all know that even if you have very little, if you have a very thoughtful and deliberate and informed way of marshaling your resources and creating a budget, managing debt, it's very important. And also sticking to a plan. So all of these things, I think have been barriers in the past. I think we're slowly attacking them. And we're making progress. I think also now, and the foundation works with certain firms and RIAs that are willing to lead in this space. And I think they're setting really great examples for what other firms could be doing. And I think the more of that, the more we'll sort of see firms stepping up, because they're going to want to have, the word be that they have a supportive culture and they have the right policies and practices. And then I would also say, we are at a tipping point, but I don't think students have been asking, what does this firm do on pro bono the way they do in the law field, for example. Like when I was interviewing, I asked, what is the policy here? Most of the law firms I talked to allowed some amount of billable hours for pro bono work. They had a partner, not an associate, but a partner overseeing the pro bono. So there are certain signals in terms of how the firm was operating that this matters. And I think increasingly we'll see students coming out of the registered programs and also just younger advisors starting to ask more. And I think that will also help move the firms along. And then my last point, and sorry, there's kind of a lot I want to say on this, is there are some barriers, right? And we know that sometimes firms are concerned about compliance. They may be concerned about insurance. And I just want to point out that we at the foundation are always trying to work on these barriers and lower them or eliminate them. So just as an example, we work with our pro bono compliance advisory firm, Market Counsel. We have a really great compliance FAQ on our website that goes through a lot of the concerns compliance units may have, and really can provide an advisor with, a wonderful tool to use when they approach their employer and say, hey, I want to do this. And we also offer free E&O liability insurance coverage to any CFP professional who's taken our training and who connects to an opportunity through our website or through one of our granted organizations. So again, trying to attack the barriers and also work with firms on the right types of incentives and building that right kind of culture.
Yeah, that's an incredible offer. That seems like a fantastic deal. And, there's an educational component to this, right? So I hope that the young advisors or any advisor who's listening to this will begin to do what you did coming out of law school and begin to ask the question, what are we doing? How are we giving back? How can I be part of this? And I think once that becomes more commonplace, the firm, you'll start to see that 28% number rise pretty dramatically. Yeah, the last one also a little surprising to me, not perhaps upon further reflection, but I guess if you would ask me, I wouldn't have guessed that professional development opportunities were a huge part of this. But I suppose that you're exposed to new populations and new presenting concerns that you don't get in the course of working with your average millionaire next door. Is that sort of the thrust of the main professional development opportunities, or are there more?
Yeah, it was fascinating in this research to see the professional development outcomes advisors themselves are experiencing when they do pro bono service. And a couple of things I'd point out. One is to become a certified financial planner, as you know, there are principal knowledge topics that you have to master, right? And there's a whole variety of them. And now, and we think this is terrific. There's some, and as you well know, as a behavioral expert, this domain of psychology around money is now very talked about, and it's part of the principal knowledge topics for CFPs. So a majority of our respondents said there are 15 different principal knowledge topics where they have actually been able to bolster their skills by doing pro bono. So that's a whole set of hard skills that are being developed, new issues that are being navigated and mastered, and really, really a powerful set of skills that advisors are burnishing there. But we also found in the arena of soft skills, really, really important gains are being made. And just to share a couple data points, in terms of client contact, and this is for especially younger advisors told us, in fact, more than 80% of advisors under the age of 35 said that pro bono improved their communication skills, and they were able to use that with paid clients. They were able to use that with pro bono. Also, of all advisors, 73% said pro bono enables them to interact with a much more diverse client base. And then a majority as well told us that they're able to take on new roles, especially if they're younger advisors, often leadership roles, and address new issues and keep learning. So, we really think that the professional development arena, you see these outcomes that improve hard skills and soft skills, but that in turn benefit not just the advisor, but their employer as well. So that goes to the business case too, because ultimately advisors doing this work improve and can bring those skills to the paid clients as well.
It's been my experience of service that often you get back so much more than you give, and that certainly that picture is being painted here too. Like the people that volunteer through your foundation are doing a world of good, but they're also improving their own lives and sharpening their own skills in the process. Jon, one of the things, this is a personal question, perhaps one that's born of my experience as a psychotherapist, but one of the things that I entered into my psychotherapeutic career with a lot of enthusiasm for and burnt out on a bit was doing pro bono work for members of my faith community. And that was something I did the whole time I was counseling, and I certainly had some positive and some worthwhile experiences there. But one thing I encountered with some regularity was that my no-show rates were higher among clients who weren't paying. And it felt like the homework I gave was sometimes taken more seriously. And it put me in mind of this Thomas Paine quote when he said, "What we obtain too cheaply, we esteem too lightly. It is dearness only that gives everything its value." So, on the one hand, you've made a compelling case for a world of good that's to be done in providing pro bono services. From the behavioral perspective, though, how do we make sure that people have skin in the game, that they're involved, that they're sort of pulling their own weight and doing their part? Because we know that the relationship between a planner and a client is a two-way street, and it takes both parties working in concert. How do you sort of ensure that takes place when there's no money changing hands?
This is a great question, and I will admit there is some truth to that quote. And frankly, within a pro bono context, there are greater no-show rates, right, than in a paid context. And you have to keep in mind the typical, client profile in pro bono. When we have spoken to many of our nonprofit partners out in the community, is a single mom with a job, at least one job, maybe a job and a side gig to bring in more resources, maybe two jobs. So it's tough, right? It's tough to manage that. And then also, again, this is a person who probably hasn't been told that expert financial advice can make a meaningful difference. So may come in with some skepticism, about financial services, just generally, right? And sort of, what truly can this do for me? So I do admit that there are some barriers here, but I do think, and we look at this as a relationship. And it's not just the relationship with the advisor, it's often the relationship with the community-based nonprofit. And this is why we find it so powerful when we work with and partner with community-based nonprofits that have been around for years, that are well-known in the neighborhood, in the community, and that have a lot of trust. Because as we know, in any financial advisory relationship, trust is the bedrock. If you don't have that, forget it, right? But we do find that even for fairly brief engagements, if the volunteer comes in and is working with our community-based partner, that trust does extend to the volunteers in a very effective way. So there are ways to reduce the no-show rate, so long as trust is really being instilled. That's very important. Interestingly, we found where the program is more digital and the connections are sort of more online and not really rooted in, kind of even like a face-to-face Zoom initially, the no-show rates are higher, right? So the more kind of human connection is fostered, and whether that's the program manager at the nonprofit first and then handing off to the volunteer advisor second, which would be typical. But if it's just sort of like signing in on a computer and then getting matched to an advisor, that no-show rate's going to be higher, right? Because there isn't that sort of trusted relationship that's being built. The other thing I would say is really listening to the client and meeting them where they are. And that's essential, whether it's a one-time engagement or it's a multiple meeting engagement. And we do try to recommend multiple meeting engagements. We do think those are the most effective. But again, that's not always possible given the advisors and the clients' busy schedules. There really, really has to be a no judgment zone, and really following what the client wants in terms of their goals and empowering them. And many of these folks have a lot of shame about money. Maybe they've made some bad decisions. Maybe they've had medical issues. They just simply haven't had enough income to meet their obligations. And so there can be a lot of shame, a lot of stigma, and it's very important that advisors don't inadvertently play into that or enhance those bad feelings, but rather really combat them and really empower the client to do what they're able. So in our Pro Bono 101 kind of training, that's an orientation for any advisor that's interested in this work, we actually have a section on coaching skills, how to coach for success, and really how to meet people where they are. Empathic listening is very important. Getting to know the individual as a person, right, and not just a balance sheet. And I think all of those things help create a stickiness between the advisor and the pro bono client that can really, really serve the engagement well. But that said, when you're paying for something and you're affluent and you really, really have to get somebody to help with your portfolio, you may be a little bit more tempted to show up. That's going to seem like a more relevant, based on our culture and our society, a more relevant service for you than initially it might seem for a struggling lower income individual until they experience the power of working with an advisor and what they can truly get out of it.
Yeah, so what I'm hearing is partner with other organizations and borrow, like, have that sort of halo effect of trust, borrow some of the trust of that partner organization, humanize it to the extent possible, because that's what provides a nice hook and makes it a much more powerful thing than the digital. And you're much too kind to say it this way, but I will say it the way that I heard it. But just kind of get over yourself too. Realize that if someone no shows, there may be environmental considerations, life considerations that are keeping them from it. It's maybe not about you, and that it's less of a cause to be offended or put off, and more of an opportunity to listen and to empathize and to be thoughtful about how to proceed with that. So again, you're much too kind and gentle to say it that way, but that's what I was telling my younger therapeutic self. It's not about you. There's reasons that have nothing to do with you that this may not have gone down.
Very well said, I think. Yes, that was a very good synopsis, Daniel.
Yeah. So, John, one of the things I noticed when going through your research is that Edelman Financial Engines and some of the other folks that I listened to read about in your reporting that were already engaged in pro bono efforts did so with an explicit goal of serving underserved populations, Black and brown families, LGBTQ communities, things like that. And if we look at something like the racial wealth gap, which is something I've talked about on this podcast many times before, depending on which measure you look at, Atlanta has the biggest racial wealth gap in the country. We know that Black and Hispanic families have, on average, dramatically less accumulated wealth, higher levels of student loan debt, lower average incomes. And the magnitude of that gap is so great. I think the lowest estimate that I saw was 7x, and it was kind of up from there. Can pro bono planning help alleviate long-standing systemic problems like the racial wealth gap? Can we begin to chip away at that with pro bono planning?
Yeah, and first, great question, and the answer in short is yes. But by no means, can pro bono financial planning be the sole answer? Clearly, there needs to be various policy interventions and other changes that impact this issue. But I do think we really can have an extraordinary impact just within pro bono financial planning. And we did an assessment of our grantees. And so each year we fund a range of nonprofit organizations, and we work with many others. Unfortunately, we can't give them all grants each year, but we do try to give grants to nonprofits that have particularly impactful programs. And we looked at their end clients. We did an assessment, and we projected that about 65% of the end clients are from communities of color. So this is, very much we see the racial wealth gap showing up in what I will call the nonprofit financial capability ecosystem, right? There's a whole network of nonprofits out there that are helping tackle the racial wealth gap, that are helping empower communities of color and other lower income communities with knowledge, with tools, with resources, be that, housing, counseling, workforce development. There's a whole range of services. And we often are able to work with our nonprofit partners to have them embrace pro bono financial planning as an additional service, which is terrific and something that we're very, very involved in. But I would say also we do have a communities of color initiative specifically. And for this, we have selected organizations that have a particularly strong track record in terms of helping a community that has particularly been affected by the racial wealth gap. So we do have that program. And we are learning. We've created a learning community, and we bring our leaders together to discuss this on a periodic basis. But another thing I want to point out is it's really important for the profession to keep diversifying, because when we're out there talking to nonprofits, often we'll get, and this goes to trust, it would be great if you had volunteers who look like the community that they will be helping, because we find that they can be particularly effective. There's sort of instant trust there. And you also see data in the paid space, by the way, that shows a lot of, for example, a Black client may prefer to work with a Black planner, and so you certainly see that data. But right now, the volunteer workforce is overwhelmingly white, and really, we would like to see more, more advisors of color. There simply aren't that many CFP professionals of color right now. That's changing, slowly. But we really think that will bolster the pro bono movement as well, in several different ways. So we're very interested in working with partners. We are really thrilled with what the Center for Financial Planning at CFP Board is doing to try to bring greater diversity and inclusion to the profession. But I think that's part of what has to happen if we're really going to see the potential here. But generally, I do see this as an important weapon to bring to bear as we really try to counter the racial wealth gap in the country.
Yeah, it seems like a virtuous cycle, right? So we know that firms who offer pro bono planning are more likely to attract young and diverse advisors. And, we know that the pro bono planning volunteer movement needs more advisors like this. And so it seems like what you're doing here can have far-reaching sort of virtuous cycle sort of impact. Jon, I appreciate the work that you're doing, the way that you spend your time, the way that your organization goes to bat for people who don't always have a voice in sort of financial seats of power. If people feel called to do this work the way that you feel called to do it, how would you suggest they start? If they work at a firm that they've listened to this podcast, they're excited about the mission, but perhaps their firm doesn't offer any sort of clear and easy pathway to that now, how do you suggest folks like that get started?
Yeah, well, Daniel, we've worked really hard to make it easy, or at least easier. So if folks go to our website, which is ffpprobono.org, there's a whole wealth of resources there, including our Pro Bono 101 training. And this is just an hour. For CFPs, you get a CE credit, and it's totally free. And it's sort of like an introduction. And then what I would recommend is click through to our pro bono plannermatch.org site. And any CFP professional can create a profile, register, and then browse opportunities. And right now we have about 50 different types of volunteer opportunities. And these are to help different underserved groups. There's military and veterans that can be helped, domestic violence survivors, widows, all kinds of different types of clients. And there's different time commitments too, anything from just an hour a month to things that are much more intensive. So really it gives it a pretty broad diversity of opportunity. And select one. Most of our nonprofit partners offer additional training and orientation as well. And then you'll be on your way. And as I said, we have free resources you might want to use with your compliance group, which we do recommend that you connect to when you're about to do this work. And then also complimentary E&O liability insurance if you connect through our platform. So try to make it easy, try to give you peace of mind. The risk, by the way, I should mention, is very low. We've never been aware of a claim asserted by a pro bono client for an engagement like this. But again, we do provide that just for peace of mind. The other thing I would say is we are a 501c3 charitable organization. We are wholly supported by the generosity of financial planning firms and financial advisors to do the work that we do. It funds all of our operations. So it's also easy to make a gift. If you go to ffpprobono.org/donate, you can make a gift right there. And again, we really do rely on the generous spirit within the profession to really drive us forward. And we have been thrilled to have some of the top companies, RIAs, and individuals that really care about this to step forward. And I will mention Orion in particular, who is the exclusive national sponsor of ProBonoPlannerMatch.org. And we really hope we have about 2,000 CFPs registered now, and we do hope within the next about 5 years to have at least 10,000 registered. So we're on an aggressive path for growth, we hope. And I encourage any of the listeners to please check that resource out.
Okay, so if every advisor who listens to this show every week goes and signs up, they will reach their goal. So let's go. Let's go.
That sounds great.
Let's get him there. Let's get him there this weekend. No, Jon, what you're doing is incredible work. And if, for the advisors listening to this, I think Jon and crew have left us without any excuses. They've made it very safe. They've made it very easy to do this work. And, I think a special shout out, there's a term in psychology called the wounded healer. And we know from the research that if your own life has been touched by, something, that you're better at helping others than people whose lives have been untouched by that, right? So if you've been impacted, if you were raised by a single mother, or, are a single mother yourself, or, have a friend who is, like, these are the kind of people who can do the work in a way that no one else can. So check out the different varieties of opportunities, see how they intersect with your own lived experience, and consider whether you're in a place to offer help where you may be uniquely well positioned to be a gift and a blessing in someone else's life. Jon, thank you for sharing your research with us, and thank you especially for the work that you and your team do. One more time, what's that website?
That is ffpprobono.org. So please check us out. And thank you, Daniel. I really appreciate being able to come on and talk about this work and try to get more folks interested and involved.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much, Jon.
All right, take care.
Thanks for tuning in to Standard Deviations. If you can't wait till next week for more behavioral finance insights, visit www.orion.com. All opinions expressed by Dr. Daniel Crosby and podcast guests are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinion of or endorsement by Orion and its affiliates, subsidiaries, and employees. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as a basis for legal, tax, and investment decisions. The opinions are based upon information the participants consider reliable.